Welcome to the Object-Oriented UX podcast, a podcast about tackling complexity head-on, gracefully organizing massive amounts of information, and designing scalable, future-proof, and of course, naturally intuitive object-oriented user experiences. An OOUXer is a powerful blend of information architect, business analyst, facilitator, and UX strategist. If this sounds like you or what you aspire to, you are so in the right place. I'm Sophia Prater, UX designer, chief evangelist of Object-Oriented UX, and your host. Let's jump into it. What's up, OOUXers? So I guess this is season 2 of the OOUX podcast. Let's go with that. We've taken a bit more of a break than planned. The beginning of 2021 was a little crazy, getting ready for cohort 4. And we also had a pretty busy year bringing Object-Oriented UX to some amazing design teams. So a shout out to my new OOUX friends at Phase 2 Technology, Duo Security, Athena Healthcare, and HubSpot. Y'all are awesome. And I am really excited to get to know a few of you even better in cohort 4. So cohort 4 is full of the Object-Oriented UX certification program. But y'all, if you go to objectorientedux.com, or you can actually go now to OOUX.com/certification, you can find 2 other really great options to get the ball rolling on your OOUX prowess. And after this interview where Cornel and I basically come to the conclusion that studying OOUX is the best way to prepare yourself for the inevitable future where UX designers will be tasked with designing completely immersive experiences, you're going to want to join this OOUX circus, believe me. So those 2 options are, excuse me, 1, simply get on the wait list for cohort 5. So cohort 4 sold out in about 10 days, and most of those seats went to those on the wait list. So you're going to want to be the first to know when those early bird spots come on sale. So you're going to get a better price, and you're going to ensure that if you want to be part of cohort 5, then you will be able to be part of cohort 5. The second option, so if you want to dive into Object-Oriented UX, if you want to jump in the deep end ASAP, we have a super low risk offer for you. So you can go ahead and purchase the course as an audit. So you'll get all of the videos, like 20 hours worth of videos, all the materials, the templates, all that good stuff. You're just not going to get the one-on-ones with me because we have 31 people in cohort 4. So there's no more space in the schedule for more one-on-ones. You're not going to get the forum access where myself and the mentors are, giving feedback on all the assignments. You're not going to get all the office hours. You're not going to get all that stuff. But here's the cool thing. So your investment in this audit will 100% be able to be applied toward a spot in cohort 5. So if you decide you do want to get certified, you're not paying twice. We don't want you to pay twice, okay? So think of it kind of like a down payment into cohort 5. But then you can just go ahead and get started. As soon as those videos start dripping out on March 15th, you'll have access to that as well. And if you're listening to this after March 15th for any reason, because I know I listen to podcasts that are like 2 years old or 3 years old. So if you are a person in the future, still go to Object-Oriented UX /certification. Let me get that URL right. Go to OOUX.com/certification and get more information on whatever we're offering now. But you will be able to get that material. You'll be able to get access to that ASAP. And if you want more details on the audit, go to that URL, OOUX.com/certification. I got it right this time. And there's going to be a link at the top that says learn more about auditing the course. Click on that and it'll jump you straight to the details. Okay. So we are finally kicking off the podcast for 2021. Let's call this season 2 with an amazing conversation with Cornel Hillmann. So he is one of the leaders in XR design. So XR being this umbrella term for virtual reality, augmented reality, everything in between. So his first book, Unreal for Mobile and Standalone VR, link in the show notes, is all about creating professional VR apps without coding. So it's basically a handbook for getting started in VR. There are example projects in there. It really just kind of walks you through how to get started using using Unreal. And Cornel and I we recently connected when he reached out to me because he plans to mention object-oriented UX in his upcoming book, which is coming out, I think, of September of this year. Again, there's a link in the show notes for his upcoming book to just go ahead and pre-order that. It's called, y'all are going to love this, UX for XR, User Experience Design and Strategies for Immersive Technologies. So, and he wants to mention object-oriented UX in the book. That's pretty exciting, right? So, like I said, we've got links to his first book and a link to pre-order his upcoming book in the show notes, as well as we've got other links on how to connect with Cornel via his website and LinkedIn. So, who is this guy? Cornel is, as I said, one of the leaders in XR, and he's an entrepreneur. His companies have designed experiences for Panasonic, Jaguar, Singapore International Film Festival, and many, many more amazing clients. He's got an incredible backstory that involves Timothy Leary and kidnappings. Let's just jump into it, right? You've heard enough from me. Enjoy the conversation, and yeah. Happy OOUXing. All right, Cornel Hillmann, welcome to the OOUX podcast.
All right, yes.
So Cornel, you've been in 3D visualization since the early 90s, if my LinkedIn stalking is correct. Can you tell us how did you get into this field? How did you start working in 3D visualization and working in 3D stuff on a screen?
So yeah, basically I started with art direction. Originally I was working in publishing and print and doing art direction for magazines, but my fascination was always with games. So I was a gamer and I loved games and I wanted to get more into 3D stuff. And but back in those days it was really troublesome. The software wasn't really good and it was really difficult to make money with it. That's the other thing. It was not easy to produce things that actually could be used professionally. It was more like you could say more like a side hustle, like a side gig, like more of a like a professional hobby a bit. So, and then things changed, and then the whole media environment changed in a sense that interaction design became more a thing. And you had, in the early days, you had like Flash, Macro Media Director, and these kind of things where people actually started to do stuff in interactive things in 3D. And you had like more industrial oriented applications like Virtools, which allowed you to like kind of program with a visual interface, like object interactions, that kind of, and that stuff fascinated me because it was also games related, and so that brought me into interaction design and 3D visualization, and then into game design and that kind of thing.
So do you remember as a kid being really into games?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. But I was not a lot of my friends. They were really early on with Atari and all that stuff. I skipped all that, so I never at that stage. I was not. I mean, I have always been a visual gamer. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's a specific class of gamer that needs really good visuals. So I need really good visuals to be satisfied as a gamer. And so the first game I actually bought was Myst, if you know that game.
Of course, that was my first game as well, actually.
See, yeah,
it really was. That was the first. Well, no, I think probably Mario Brothers was before Myst.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
think, but they were around the same time. And I mean, I guess my first computer game
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. That's
an
what I meant. The first computer game. Yeah.
other than, being at my dad's office and playing Minesweeper or Solitaire, with like
Yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah. I
game
mean,
was
the
on
first
there. But
legit
like,
game.
yeah, the first game that I was obsessed with, I would
Yeah,
say, was
exactly,
Myst.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and the funny thing is that we have come like full circle now because Myst just got released in VR December 2020.
I saw that. And have you been
And
there? Did you go? I'm sure you have. You've
I
been
mean,
to the island in VR now, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, like the thing is this: I haven't installed it on my current headset because I ran out of space because the Mist requires like
No.
9 gigs or something, and for me, it's such a tough decision. Like, what do I have to delete? What apps can I delete? And that's such a horrible thing.
This
But
does not seem like a tough decision to me. Delete whatever you need to delete. Go to the island. You have to go
yeah, yeah,
back
I
to the
know.
island.
Yeah, yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. Because I mean, that's the thing, because back then in the 90s, I thought like, when I was playing Myst, I was like, man, I want to be in that world. I want to be there. I want to be, I want to walk around there. I want to be inside. I want to be inside of that game. And
Yes.
and that seemed to be so far away that that kind of thing would ever happen, and now it's here. That's so amazing, right?
Right. So actually that was I'm gonna skip to another question. So about
Hmm.
just timeline. So as you've been in this field for no, not 20 years, 30 years ish, getting on to
Yeah.
30 years. Do you feel like this transition, I'm basically like humans
Hmm.
transitioning into immersive worlds, do you feel like it's happening faster than you expected, or is it happening, do you feel a level of impatience, like let's get this show on the road, that we should be further than where we are now?
I mean, originally I thought it's not going to happen in my lifetime. That's what I thought
Mm.
originally. So I thought, actually, like in the mid '90s, I was hanging out with for a while with Timothy Leary. Do you know him?
Yes,
He's like a
yes.
counter. It could like younger generations sometimes
He's
don't.
like
I
the
mean,
Pied
he's
Piper of LSD, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So he was like a counterculture icon. He was. And at that time when I met him and I was hanging out with him, um, he was not into LSD and all that. He was totally into cyber punk and all that. So he was really into computer games, into virtual reality, and he was the first one who introduced me to the whole thing. So through him I got introduced to virtual reality,
Wow.
and that was for me at that time because I was actually working on computers that were really slow at that time. And Timothy Leary, he was actually writing his stuff on a typewriter, so he wasn't even using computers. So for me, it was like, man, you don't, how about if you just sit on a computer and look at how slow things are, because you already have these huge ideas, but like in reality, computers are really like shitty. They're really slow, and it's going to take forever if this whole virtual reality thing is not going to happen anytime soon. It's going to take 100 years or whatever. So that was my first introduction to the whole concept of virtual reality and cyberpunk, and the whole scene of it and the underground culture of that time.
I
So
I feel like I should just take my script and
mm.
throw it out the window right now because now we're on Timothy Leary. So were you when and honestly, like you must have been really young. You don't look old enough to have been hanging out with Timothy. Was he
I
a
mean, it
lot
was a
older than
late.
you?
I mean, that was a late Timothy Leary. I mean, he died a few
Okay.
years after that, so
Yeah.
that was right before he died. He died a few years later, but he was in an amazing shape. I mean, he was like all over the place. He was taking me to parties, and he was dancing. He was he was like a 15-year-old, in his old age. And it was also like, kind of like a role model for me, because I thought, man, when I'm at that age, I want to be like that, you know?
And what was the context of you? I mean, he was at Harvard, right? That's where he was doing all of his. Was that Harvard that he was doing
But I
all of
mean,
his
I met him
development?
like way past all that
Okay.
stuff. So there was
Okay.
all that stuff has already passed. So he was already like, you know, I mean, he was trying to find a new identity, like past all that LSD, like hippies
Okay.
thing. And his new identity that he wanted to discover was with virtual reality, with cyberpunk and that whole shamanism kind of thing there. And that was a very interesting scene, and it was very inspiring, you know. So
And where was this? Like, can you paint a little bit of a picture of where, like, were you on a campus? Like, what was going on? Where in the world were you? And what was the context of you and Timothy Leary bringing you into the world of virtual reality and cyberpunk?
So actually, I first met him at a very good friend's place in Beverly Hills, and that was Gisela Getty. She was the wife of Jean-Paul Getty, who the grandson of the old Getty that got you know the famous story with the abduction where the ear was cut off, and there was actually a movie that was made out of it with. It's like a famous story, you know, the oil tycoon Getty, you know, and
I
you know there
believe
was
you. Yes.
there was this famous mafia abduction thing where, you know, with ransom and so he was. I have to send you the link later of that movie. That's a movie, Trust. The name is Trust. No, actually, it was a miniseries called Trust. You have to look into that.
Just gotten weirder. Okay. Keep going. Please.
So basically, she introduced me. So he was always hanging out at her place. You know, whenever I visited her, like I always ran into Timothy Leary, and I had a lot of respect for him. You know, because he was such a, you know, a childhood hero. He was such a big counterculture, you know, legend, basically. And so I was like, you know, I had a lot of respect for him, and I really got closer to him when I ran into him at where I worked at my office, because my office at the publishing company was shared. There was a lot of magazines. There was one PC magazine called PC Gaming or something. And he would always come to that office and talk to the editor, because he was writing, you know, doing stories about computer gaming and about virtual reality and that kind of stuff. So I would always run into him in the elevator, and he would say, "Oh, aren't you that guy from you know, Gisela's place?" You know, and that's how we got closer to each other. And then he invited me to parties and so forth. You know, that's how it all came together. You know.
Wow. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I think like LSD is a form of alternate reality. I mean, you're basically taking yourself out of the default reality, and and so it's the corollary makes sense, and I can imagine that the two experiences would inspire each other.
There's basically the freedom of expression, you know, the whole, a bit of a hippies idea behind it, you know, the exploring endless, you know, the endless universe, basically, you know, that's that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah. So that's great on the background piece. So what today is getting you excited about XR, and for the listeners, when we refer to XR, that's and correct me if I'm wrong, Cornel, like it's an all-encompassing term when we're talking about VR, so virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically XR is the umbrella term for virtual reality and augmented reality. And so mixed reality is really a difficult term, because there's a lot of issues attached to mixed reality, because mixed reality in itself isn't really a technology. You know, virtual reality is a technology, augmented reality is a technology, but mixed reality is just like basically a blending between these two technologies. And it very often confuses people if you use mixed reality, because it's also a branding term for Microsoft. Microsoft calls this whole XR product line mixed reality. So that means, for example, when you have a VR headset that comes from the Microsoft line of products, it's called a mixed reality headset, while it's actually because of the branding, but while it's actually a VR headset, so there's a bit of confusion sometimes,
And that makes a lot of sense, because mixed reality it's kind of like how you're applying a form of augmented reality, right? So and again, correct me if I'm wrong. So virtual reality is full immersion. Augmented reality is I'm seeing the world around me, the default world around me, and I'm seeing superimposed on top of that additional information or additional objects. The augmented reality is, like, I think a good example is the Yelp lens. You hold your phone up on the street and you can start seeing stars of the different restaurants over it, versus what I've heard mixed reality being used as is I can like look on my desk and I can see like a little dancing pink elephant on my desk if I want to see that.
That's also augmented reality. See, that's
Okay.
that's very often the confusion that comes in with mixed reality, because all of that is augmented reality. So basically, you have an information layer over reality. That's augmented reality. And some people make a distinction between augmented reality, and that people claim, for example, which I think is wrong, that once you have occlusion, then it's mixed reality. Basically, once occlusion means you have like an item that's covering up a virtual item, basically, right? Then people say, oh, okay, now you have mixed reality because it really lives in that world, because it can be covered up by other real items, basically. So once you have occlusion, but I think that's completely wrong, honestly, because occlusion has always been part of augmented reality. It's always has been, but before it was just not very, very well implemented. And occlusion has always been an augmented reality feature, right? And but in terms of mixed reality, what it means is that you can have an augmented reality headset that has VR capabilities. There are concepts, for example, you have augmented reality glasses, and then you can dim the glasses, and that you actually don't see the world outside. Then all of a sudden you're in a completely virtual world. And the same goes for the other way, that you have virtual reality glasses or virtual reality headset, where you can enable an augmented reality view, where you can basically see the outside world and augment on that world with objects, And so this is how it blends together, like from either side of the spectrum, right? So, and a lot of people also call it spatial computing. So, and people call this is like the era we're heading into is the spatial computing era, because basically we have an information layer that's basically everywhere. So like anywhere we go, we especially the internet that used to be that's at the moment is on a screen, at your computer, but with spatial computing, the internet is everywhere. So every object that you look at in the real world has an information layer that you can access, right?
Right. And that's so interesting. I mean, we're already, I feel like our screens are sort of like bursting at the edges to sort of escape the screens. I mean, we're already so immersed in that information layer. It's already so much part of our life. We're living in these digital environments. We're in a digital environment right now, right?
Right.
As we're talking to each other, you're in Singapore, correct?
Correct.
So we're talking to each other across across the globe, and this information layer really is just, it feels like it's just about to pop outside of the screen. And
exactly, yeah.
We're already so immersed in it. It's still contained within these boxes.
Exactly, yeah.
So I really want to talk to you about speculative biology, but maybe we'll get back to that. Okay, I'm gonna like highlight that, and we might come back to that, because I really want to get into some of the nitty gritty. So,
okay, great.
So you're about to publish your second book, and which is very exciting. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
So your first book, which was Unreal Unreal it's like a corollary to Oculus, right? Like a kind of like development.
Unreal is a game engine.
As a game, okay.
So I could have put in the title Unreal Game Engine for mobile, but then it would have been too long, and people who buy the book would know anyways, right? So.
Right. Your audience was very specific. So this first book, Unreal for Mobile and Standalone VR, it's kind of a handbook, right, for VR developers. Would you say that that's correct?
Yeah, it's a handbook, and it was meant for designers and artists
Okay.
to build applications, because that's actually that's the great thing about the Unreal Engine, that you can actually do build applications without coding. So you can build application with visual scripting, which is like a visual
Mm-hmm.
version of C++, which means you have like these logic blocks that you connect, these nodes, these logic nodes that you connect to build interaction, so to build the logic of gameplay and interaction logic and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I watched your talk from 2019, the Animago conference. I did
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
that
yeah.
talk, and I saw some screenshots of that development environment, that very visual development environment. And I mean, that was a technical talk, and I'm assuming that the book that you wrote is, I mean, it's a technical book. It's like getting started. Like if you want to start designing for VR using Unreal,
Exactly. Yeah,
like
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is gonna,
exactly.
you have like actual exercises you can do, and you're actually showing people how to get up and running with it. But
Exactly.
your upcoming book, though, which is what I really want to talk about,
Yeah,
UX for XR, user experience design and strategies for immersive technologies. So this sounds like a very different book.
yeah, totally.
How is this book different than your first book?
I mean, this book is completely different, because it's first of all, it's in the A Press Design Thinking series, so it's a design thinking book. So it looks at problem solving and how we can approach problem solving in XR. And so the idea for this book was basically, what can we bring, because from the UX design process to the XR world, because the XR world is more or less dominated by game development standards. So people who develop apps in XR usually are game developers who use game development practices, like a game design document, and they have their own ways of doing things, right? And there has been a bit of a crossover between game design and UX design in the last decade, especially for UX UI stuff, but not the thing like where you look at it from a product design perspective, where you look at
Mm-hmm.
product design, that side of UX design. And the idea was like, hey, so UX design has been so incredibly successful. I mean, it has revolutionized, the digital economy, like all these amazing success stories. It has created so much wealth and so many unicorns. And, I mean, look at all these amazing products that are basically come out of the UX design process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So based on this idea that it has created uh, so many great products. So what can we take from that and bring that into developing products for XR? So
Right.
what works and what doesn't work, and like if something doesn't work, how can we fix it? And and I have so basically a lot of things are easy to transfer. I mean, the research part and user interviews and all that. But then I identified one area that's really not easy to transfer, and that is prototyping. And prototyping, is a big part of the UX design process for mobile and web stuff. And it's so easy to do. Basically, you do a design sprint, and you do like a clickable, a low fidelity prototype, and then, oh, that doesn't work, we'll do another one, and we'll do a click through here, click through there, and it's so easy to iterate and change things. That's not that easy in XR, because things are more complicated. You're using a game engine, you're building 3D stuff, you have to deal with a lot of more issues. You have a lot more ways to interact. There's a lot of, there's a can of worms basically everywhere. Everywhere you look, you have a lot more options of how to interact with the world. So I kind of identified that as a problem, and in the book I'm going over how to basically tackle that problem.
I think that this is fascinating. I think that the world needs this book, and I think that UX designers are going to need this book. So, I mean, I think there's this like, what can you there's what can XR learn from UX, but there's also the opposite of that. What can
Exactly.
UX designers learn from VR and XR right now? And I think what's going to happen, like we were just talking about how virtual reality and this basically this information layer is going to start leaping off the screen soon. We're
Yeah.
gonna start being more and more immersed in the information layer, for better or worse,
Mm.
and it's just going to happen. And what I'm interested in is, game design and UX design are so similar, but at the end of the day, game design is about making things hard and UX design is about making things easy.
Yeah,
And
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
and and,
totally.
and so there's a little bit of a tension there. And right
Mm.
now I see VR, augmented reality a little bit less. It's getting into the professional world, but VR really is, don't take this the wrong way, but it's still a novelty for a lot of people. It's still like you were doing this
That's true.
as a maybe education, but you know, my bank does not have a VR experience yet.
True.
E-commerce does not have does not have a VR experience yet. I mean, that's getting there. I mean, so in stores, we're having some bits of like, I remember trying on some glasses from a website and being able to use my camera to see what the glasses looked like. So I was having some sort of like my webcam. In an e-commerce experience, like a little bit of that augmented reality was happening, but it's going to start happening more and more, where our clients, our companies are going to start saying, no, we don't just need an Alexa app. We're going to need an Oculus app. We're going to need to start creating these immersive experiences. So a few years ago, this is the Evernote thing that I sent you that I don't think you could ever access. But this was like back in it was timestamped in 2016. And I did a few napkins, sketches, and musings, probably with a couple glasses of wine in me, about what I was calling the 3D box model, kind of like playing off of the CSS box model. And I was thinking how just UX designers' work is going to have to change in the next few years. In the same way, like in 2011, 2013, we really had to change our processes around responsive design. We're going to have to start changing our processes around three-dimensional design. And of
Exactly.
course, I'm thinking like, how is object-oriented UX going to play into this? How can object-oriented UX help with this? So I guess my question is, really let's go back to how you sort of see our work overlapping, because I definitely see this big overlap, right? Because as soon as when you reached out to me, I was like, yes, let me dig up my notes from all this thinking that I've done on how specifically object oriented UX is going to like really prepare user experience designers to start working in three-dimensional digital spaces. What does that look like to you? Like where do you see this overlap between XR and specifically object oriented UX?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, you're completely right. So basically, within XR, we're dealing with 3 dimensions. So basically, it's a 3D world. So we have to deal with 3D objects, and and very often these objects are close to what the mental model is of a model, of an object. So for example, I very often use the example of a shopping cart. For example, a shopping cart in a web app or a mobile app is a button with a little picture of a shopping cart on it.
Right.
While in VR, you can actually you could be pushing a virtual shopping cart that actually looks like the real thing, and that has physics that you can slam into other shopping carts that you can race around. So basically, it could be the real thing. It could be like behave like an actual shopping cart. So there's not this abstract. I mean, it's the mental model and the actual thing can be. It doesn't have to be, but it can be very close to each other. But then the question is, do you want it to be like, maybe you find a shopping cart tedious? Maybe you want to have only the fun part of it. Maybe you only want to race it, or you want to have an assistant that does it for you. But I mean, this connection between the mental object and the actual object is naturally more closer together with OOUX, and I think that's why OOUX is really good in that object thinking. And actually, did I mention that? I mean, in my first book, I actually talk about how important it is for designers to get into this object-oriented thinking.
You're right. I agree.
Hey, so sorry to interrupt, but since we're talking about studying OUX to prepare you for this inevitable future where your stuffy enterprise client's going to ask you to design an immersive experience, I just wanted to remind you to check out OOUX.com/certification to get on the wait list for cohort 5, or if you are a future person, hello, future person, whatever the next cohort is, or go ahead and get access to auditing the course. And so you can just go ahead and jump in. And of course, if you decide to audit the course, that investment will, of course, be able to be applied to the next cohort. Okay, so sorry to interrupt. Back to Cornel.
So basically, this object-oriented thinking in my first book was actually more towards the game engine, because the game engine is based on C++, and it's basically the blueprint scripting language, which is easy to learn for designers, but to better understand it, you have to understand object-oriented thinking. So it's good for a designer to get into the object-oriented thinking world, and then it makes it so much easier for you to deal with things and designing things for VR. So basically, what you're doing is the same thing. Basically, you're also dealing with object-oriented world. You're doing object-oriented thinking. So it's a perfect match, right? So
Right.
it's great to stay within that line of thinking. You don't have to interrupt your chain of thought, basically, right?
It's so, yeah, exactly. I mean, we're in this default reality that we're in, the quote unquote real world. So in this real world that we operate in, there is just something very naturally intuitive about it. I don't know, maybe because our brains evolved in this world. We were used to picking up objects if we want to manipulate them. What our brain does when we enter an environment is it first and foremost, it says, what are the things here? Like I have to, like, that's what the back of my brain is doing. What are the things here? How are these things relating to each other? What can I do to these things? What are the properties of these things? And my brain in the real world does that very quickly. I scan the savannah. I go through the forest to find the mushrooms that I know are edible, right?
Right.
So this is how we've survived in the world is object recognition and pattern recognition, right? It's kind of a big deal for our survival. And we go into virtual reality is just this nice corollary to that, right? We still have physics. When we break the laws of physics in virtual reality, we can, it somehow doesn't break the brain in the same, well, we can probably get onto that a little bit. You can get, if you're breaking the laws of physics too much in virtual reality, you can make people sick. But you go on these screen-based, we're sort of like, have this period of time where we are digitally immersed, yet not object-oriented. Our experiences, for the most part, are not object-oriented. When maybe the code behind them is object-oriented, but when I go to my banking website, when I go to a lot of, maybe some e-commerce is better, but when I go and apply for disability insurance or something, that experience is not object-oriented. It's very task-oriented. It's very sending me through a flow with maybe some like branches in my flow. But I don't go into that environment on my insurance website, and I can't like go into that environment and immediately recognize what all the objects are and how they all relate to each other. It's just because a lot of companies are not using object-oriented UX. They're using a task-based or procedural-based UX.
Right.
So we have this like skip where we're like we're in this default reality that is very object-oriented, and then we have virtual reality coming up. And augmented reality coming into our slowly or quickly coming into our world. But right now, most of our experiences are not very object oriented. So I guess like my question here is, what do you see like once our clients or our companies, let's keep going with the banking. So let's say my client is Wells Fargo. It's a big bank here in the US. Let's say my client is Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo is, maybe it's 2, 3, 4 years in the future. And Wells Fargo says, all right, we need to start making our immersive experience. what do you, like, that can look kind of like what you were saying with the shopping cart. Like, oh, it just looks like I'm walking into a really nice Wells Fargo, and there's like a person behind it. There's like an AI person behind the counter, and maybe I even like have to wait in line to make it really real.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's kind of like, I would call that almost skeuomorphic, right? That would be like skeuomorphic VR, because this is not a game. What would that, like, what do you see that banking app looking like in virtual reality? Is it just like walking into a bank, or is it something completely different?
So very often people call that the mirror world. So basically, this is the mirror world concept, where you basically, people use that, for example, for retail experiences. So they want a mirror of what you have in the retail space. They want it in VR, and if possible, even a deeper connection where things are updated and stuff. And then the question is, and that's a thing that's been tested, and it has yet to be seen if consumers will like that or not, because in some ways it's a great thing, because people know, they're already familiar with it, and okay, this is what I know, I know what to do here. For banking, you see an ATM, okay, I know exactly what to do, how to use this, because I've seen it before. So basically your experiences work, so everything that you expect from it can be fulfilled here. But then there's also the other thing where you may want to improve things over reality. You want to introduce like superpowers, where you make things less tedious. You want things to happen faster or more transparent, or you want to have more information. You want to make it more fun, and for one good example for that is, for example, in some games, you go and explore items. Typically you go and come into a room and you want to look at certain things. You have to walk over and grab the thing, look at it. But if you have a really big space, that gets really tedious, because you have to all the way walk to everything. That's why in VR they introduced a thing called gravity pull, where you point at an item and then you pull it in, basically, right? And then, of course,
oh my gosh, that's so fun. So just a side note on that. So my husband Luke, that is the superpower that he always wants, because he's always like, working on the car or something, and the wrench that he needs is right out of reach, and he just wants to like, just like
exactly, yeah.
The Roald Dahl story, Matilda. Like Matilda could do that, just kind of pull things into her grasp.
Yeah, so exactly. That's. And these are the superpowers that basically help you to get over things that are troublesome, tedious, boring. And with these superpowers, the thing is, they're not natural. So it's something that they have to introduce the user to, basically in the onboarding process. You have to show them, here, you have this thing that you can do to make things easier for you. Yeah. And once the user understands that this is a shortcut, and this is something that's fun or makes things easier, then the user typically very quickly gets it and takes it for granted and uses it immediately. So the human mind is very quick in taking on extra powers, basically, right? So
it is, but it's so, there's certain things, like some ways you can break the laws of physics and you confuse people. Other ways you break the laws of physics and you give them superpowers. So, and I talk about this all the time with object-oriented UX. Like, we have to have better heuristics on how we break the laws of physics within our digital environments. Because, like one of the heuristics that I talk about all the time is an object that is, if like two objects are the same, they should look the same, right? Like, it's just something as simple as that. If two objects are different, if you have two different objects, like going back to the bank, an account and a transaction, or let's say an account and let's go in e-commerce, a department and a product, two different things, two very, very different things, a department and a product in e-commerce. You want to make those things that are different look different.
Right.
If you enter into one environment and then you click, return or back or something like that, you should go back to where you just came from, right?
Right.
But then there's other things within a screen-based environment that give you superpowers, like being able to search the entire catalog, the entire warehouse of Amazon with a click of a button, right? You can find the perfect blue shoes or the perfect heel size, or undo, like undo, like that's
right.
And so there's certain things, like certain superpowers that feel intuitive, like the idea of like pointing to an object and getting it to come to you. There's something so intuitive, like just like I was talking about my husband, he like feels like he could do that. Like if he tried really, really hard, like maybe he could actually do that in the real world.
Right.
So how do we determine when to break the laws of physics and when not to break the laws of physics?
I mean, there's no other way than testing. There's basically no other way, because there's so many conflicting results with that. For example, in the early days of this current wave of VR, which started around 2016, in 2016, people were kind of like overthinking VR a little bit, and there was a lot of concern with motion sickness, which is a problem for some people, but it was kind of blown out of proportion, because in the end, it's not such a big deal. But everyone was so focused on motion sickness and how to avoid it, and my gosh, we have to. But in the end, it's. I mean, like we cannot be too careful, because some things may seem like. They seem immersion breaking, because very often that was the word people used. If we do this, we break immersion, like if you do this breaks immersion. For example, a good example is snap rotation. Snap rotation is basically you, with a click of a button, you turn around, and people were saying like, you can't do that because that breaks immersion, because you should have people turn around naturally, because you're in a 360 environment. People should actually use their body to turn around. And people made these assumptions what people should do in VR to not break immersion, but they totally forgot about the user, because a lot of users don't want to turn around. They're just too lazy to turn around, or they're sitting on a couch, or they're sitting in an airplane seat. They cannot even turn around. So basically, you have to consider what you cannot make assumption about what the user wants. You have to really test it and find out what kind of people you're dealing with, right? And that's UX territory, right?
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, are there certain things that you can, like, I think that there are certain things that you can avoid having to test it just because you have those best practices, but I guess you have to test it at some point. But like for example, the thing that I was talking about with, like, if you enter from here and then you go back, you should go back to where you came from. So Google Photos broke this heuristic. So I would be in my photo stream. Stay with me. Everybody that's listening, picture this. You're in your photo stream. You select a few photos in your photo stream and you add them to a new album. Okay, so now I'm in that album. I've gone from my photo stream to the album. I maybe make some edits. I name the album. I maybe share it. I save it. I'm still in the album. And then there's a little back button not within the browser, but within the actual Google Photos experience. I have a little arrow that's pointing to the left, which much feels like I'm going back. When I click that back button, I used to go to a list of albums, which is not where I was. I was in my photo stream. So I basically go photo stream, albums, hit the back button, and go to my list of albums, which never it's back to somewhere that I have never been before. And they have since changed that. Now, when you click the back button, you go to the photo stream. But they had to and I could have just told them that, like, no, you click the back button and you should go back to where you just were. Like, you don't have to test that. Just design it right the first time, because there's a heuristic there that if I and I know that about the real world, like if I go into this door into the kitchen and I exit that door, I would expect to be where I was before, not, in the backyard or something like that. That would be disruptive. And I think it comes down to expectations. Like, what does the user actually expect to happen or want to happen? And I guess you would need to test that to a certain extent. But I love this example of I'm pointing at the thing. What what in reality do you want to happen? You want that thing, if you like concentrate on it, you want it to pop into your grasp, right? And that's just what I would almost expect to do if I had superpowers, versus
Right.
surprising the user in a way that's not necessarily, what they expected, right? I enter, like in VR, if you're going through mist or something, mist doesn't really break that. I don't think they break that. Even if it's this magical environment, you walk in one door, if you walk out that door, you're back in the same place.
Right.
Magical things happen in this very God, like delightful is an understatement way, like just yeah, whatever, like delightful times 10 is. But it never seems to like break certain laws of physics. It breaks other laws of physics. And I just wish we had some sort of good rule of thumb on like, I guess there's testing for sure, but like testing in your head, at least, what would the user expect to happen? What would I expect to happen of the real world? What would I want to happen?
That's true. I mean, there always needs to be consistency. If you do one thing once, it has to, happen again that same way. And heuristics actually play a big role in VR. I mean, the problem with heuristics and XR in general is that they're so quickly outdated. So there's always one, and there's the next one. They get outdated so quickly because things change so quickly. And the other thing is, what's a good thing to consider is there are certain titles that are basically benchmarks in VR that set the standard for usability, and these titles set like the expectations for people. For example, one example is Alex, Half-Life. Half-Life is a famous series of, if you're familiar with that, from Valve Corporation. It's like one of the biggest gaming, it's a shooter, but it also has a lot of puzzle games in it. So it's like one of the big games and Alex, Half-Life, that game set that game set the standards for usability, because the Valve Corporation, they spent so much time in research, and they tested everything out, and what they came up with was actually, hey, give the users options. Like some people like this, but they also maybe, there's other people that prefer that. So basically, you have to give people enough options to customize, your interaction. So basically, and they basically, until someone comes up with something better, that is the gold standard for VR at the moment. What they do.
So there was this and I 100% agree with that. For the UX designers listening, I would still caution you to like don't necessarily look at Apple and Google as your standard, because they break these basic heuristics all the time. Like just the Google photos that I just did, I mean, my Gmail, like there's major usability problems in my Gmail app on my Pixel. Like I mean, it's crazy. So, we should definitely like learn and stand on the shoulder of giants and learn, but still look at that with a grain of salt and a critical eye, because that take what works, but trust your judgment, and maybe leave the rest, or continue to test, because we are still, this is like, I'm like a broken record. We are still all pioneers in this. We have not figured it out yet. There was this amazing VR experience I did at a conference, where I had two sticks in each hand, like two batons, and those batons were like fire throwers or something like that. I was fighting some aliens. It was amazing. I was on one of those like rigs where you can actually run on the rig, like the 360 running. And I was like, this is a great workout. I definitely see a future, as a side note, where movie theaters or like old malls start getting converted into like VR parks, basically, where you have, the $6,000 rig that you're never going to buy yourself, or at least not yet. And you go like gyms, even. I don't know. It was a great workout, like playing this game for 20 minutes. But so I had these two batons, and they were fire throwers or some like kind of gun type thing. And I did this. I don't think anybody told me to do this. It was just a natural thing. I put the guns together. And when the guns came together, it morphed from fire throwers into a bow and arrow. And I'm making the movement right now. Y'all can't see me that are listening, but you put them together, and it was so natural for me to just pull one back and
Yeah, yeah,
release
okay.
and turn it into a bow and arrow. And it was the cool, I think this was years ago. And I still remember that moment of like, that was so, it broke the laws of physics. One object actually turned into a different object, which I usually preach
Mm,
against, but it was so naturally intuitive. And then I
exactly.
could
Yeah.
separate it back, and it was back into these fire throwers, and then I could just put them together, and it popped, and it became this bow and arrow, and it was amazing. I had this amazing superpower. This object was this, it like totally broke the laws of physics, yet it was so intuitive.
Mm,
And I always go back to that, like, what was it about that I naturally did that. I naturally tried to
mm,
put them together. It was discoverable and intuitive. Um, and
right.
yeah, as I mean, can you
Yeah, it's
think of like what like why would I have found that so intuitive, even though it was an object was changing shape?
because you know immediately what to do. I mean, basically, your brain instantly recognizes what that is and what to do with it, and you just have it deeply inside of you, and you could switch objects really quickly. You once it's there, you know what it is and what to do with it. You know, so the you know it's amazing how the brain is able to adapt to these quick changes, and that's sometimes we underestimate what the brain is capable of. You know, that's a
Yeah.
very often a problem with and especially in the early days of VR, there was a problem. People always were too worried that users wouldn't be able to handle that, but often it turns out it's not that, you know, it's not that difficult for users to adapt. You know.
Yeah, and I think like I mean the designers could have done it where I have the flamethrowers and I also have the bow and
Mm.
arrow, but to switch I need to like go to a menu or something. Like I need to like which is a lot of 2D games now.
Right,
It's like
right,
you
right,
have to
right.
like go to the menu and say like I want this tool instead of like basically like going into your bag or something. Like that would be
Mm.
the metaphor. I go into my bag to say like okay, get the bow and arrow out of the bag and switch it and put the flamethrowers back, right?
Right.
But instead, it was one object that could switch, but there was a movement in between. There was a transition. Now, if I was just, doing my flamethrowers and all of a sudden it turned into a bow and arrow without me
Mm.
initiating anything, that would probably be really confusing and I wouldn't like that. Or maybe the
Yeah.
initiation wasn't quite the right initiation. Maybe it was like I flicked my wrist in a certain way
It
and
was
that
connected to his gesture. So
it
basically
was
the
connected
connection.
to a gesture. Yes, exactly. That was very intuitive of me putting these things together
Mm.
and then they actually extended out and it felt like it
Mm.
felt natural. It felt like, oh, okay,
Exactly.
these two smaller things, you put them together and it turns it into a bigger thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time now. I want to, if we can, I'm gonna open up we can edit this part out. I just want to make sure and I want to make sure.
Mm.
We're pausing right now.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Do you have any questions you want to ask me?
It's not something super. I mean, I would just had some questions like I mean, what you already answered, like how was your first impression when you use VR, and like what have you used, and what kind of stuff you that. And actually, my one more important question would be like, what is your impression of, you know, from talking to colleagues in the UX community, like what is their expectation of where things are moving with XR? I mean, is it, because I sometimes worry that I'm a little bit in my bubble, you know, so I want to kind of have an idea of, I mean, I think it's coming. We're right there. It's like, I mean, we're moving into the spatial computing era, and there will be a major shift coming very soon, you know. So, and I wonder if the XR community, the UX community has a sense of that or not, you know.
That's a great question. I actually had the same question for you.
Mm.
So
Okay.
going into like, okay, how far away do you think it is before my client Wells Fargo says that they want to have an immersive experience, where like we're not designing games, we're actually designing applications that are immersive, that are for getting things done. I know it's in some fields right now. I think some surgeons are using some sort of augmented reality, some engineers are using some augmented reality, but it still feels very fringe and niche. I
Mm.
think what the problem is that we're stuck. UX design is stuck on voice UI. And we
Yeah.
haven't figured that out yet. We really haven't.
Mm.
Voice UI, like anybody that's using Siri or sorry, I'm like setting off everybody's Alexas right now, probably. But anybody that is using that is feeling like, why has this not come further in the last 5 years? Like it
Right.
still feels dumb. And I honestly think we're stuck on it. I think that it needs to be more object oriented. We're still like coding our voice UI as procedurally by coming up with strings
True.
instead of teaching our voice UI, teaching our AI concepts the same way we would teach a child. We teach a child concepts. We don't teach our child grammar, correct grammar. You know, a 2-year-old, we just wanted them to know as many nouns as possible, right? And a couple adjectives and maybe a couple verbs, but like we just bake them. We just like, you know, inundate them with nouns and concepts, and they turn into these little information architects. Yet we try to teach ourselves as adults. We try to teach ourselves a different language procedurally through strings, and we try to teach our AI. And I think that we're stuck on that, and we need to figure that out before a lot of companies are going to start wanting to do an immersive experience. That's just my take. I haven't had any clients talk about it, but definitely voice UI, and we need to somehow figure that. I think it's coming. I think it's going to be in the next few years. What do you think? How many years do you think it'll be before clients start saying like, let's actually make this e-commerce experience, you know, work on Oculus? Or...
So we're right in the transition at the moment. So basically, at the moment, everyone's waiting for Apple to make their move. So everyone knows Apple has something that they're going to launch soon. The one VR headset and one AR headset. So once that happens, so everything, you know, the whole thing is going to break loose, you know. So people are going to, you know, rush through the whole thing. That's for sure. And then the other thing is for AR, it's too expensive. So like the best AR device at the moment is the Microsoft HoloLens, which is a great device. It's fabulous and it works really well. It's amazing. It's amazing technology. The way it, you know, I mean, they did a fabulous job. But it's too expensive, you know. So it's $3,000. It's not a consumer device. So it's basically they use it for enterprise, for, you know, in engineering and that kind of thing. But it's not anywhere close to where it's a consumer device. But this is going to happen soon. So within the next 3 years, it's going to happen, you know. So for sure, within the next 3 years, this major shift. And that also concerns a lot of UX designers, because UX designers will have to deal with that, you know, how to you know, how to design stuff for that, you know. Right. So that's why
So we're a little bit after the hour. Can I take, I have 2 more questions for you. Can I take just a few more minutes?
Okay, sure. No
okay, problem. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So on the tail end of that, so I think we can both, like, hopefully we're both nodding our head on this one, that like one way that UX designers to sort of prepare for the coming day when we start needing to, when the information layer spills out from our 2-dimensional screens, bursts through the seams. One way to be prepared for that is object-oriented UX, of course. Start thinking object-orientedly. What are some other ways that a UX designer can start preparing for this inevitable future?
So I think UX designers, they have to get comfortable with 3D in general, you know. So basically, they have to, you know the tools a little bit, so they can do ideation in 3D. You know, it's not that complicated. I mean, there's free applications like Blender where it's easy to do, and there's all sorts of tools that make it easier. There's actually now prototyping tools that you can use in VR, which make it even easier.
Yeah.
So there's a whole ecosystem that's building up, but you know, some people just have to get comfortable with that idea to be in 3D, and some people are, you know, they have to warm up to it, you know. So
yeah. So I think both of your books are going to be great for that. Probably would you recommend UX designers start with your second book that's coming out and then go to your first book, or start with your first book and then go to the second?
The first book is more for if you really want to build applications by yourself. But as a designer, it's possible. You can do that if you want to build something from scratch using object-oriented, you know, design with Unreal blueprints. That's possible. You can use, but you don't have to. You know, I mean, it's probably easier to start with the second book. But if you're really hardcore, if you really want to deep dive into the subject, you know, then you can get the first book and really build the whole thing by yourself and explore what's possible. It also covers, by the way, 3D and the whole pipeline of what tools are needed and all that, you know. So
I'll probably never geek out so hard as to go into your first book. That one, maybe my husband might get into that, but definitely your book that's coming out. I'm really interested to read that one and also see like how can we, not only think about UX for VR, but they start thinking like how does XR inform our UX process, and where we are today, the work that we're doing right now with our clients, the mundane website and app design. How can we start thinking more in this kind of like XR realm? So my last question for you, and this is a little bit of a loaded one. Do you think we're living in the original reality right now? Or do you think we might be living in VR right now, as Elon Musk says is probable, that this is not the original reality? What do you think about that?
I looked into that theory. I enjoy that kind of like speculative thinking. I consider that to be like speculative metaphysics, basically to think like in the far future, someone can simulate the whole thing. But I actually don't think so. I think we're living in the real thing because the whole simulation theory, I think you can simulate only 90.9999999% of the real thing. I don't think you will ever be able to simulate 100%,
Right.
because humans are not the same as binary. I mean, that it comes close, but it's still a different thing, So
there'll always be sort of an asymptote there that will never really reach that full immersion. It's gosh, there's so many good movies about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. I love that. The whole thinking about
the Matrix.
Are
we already in the Matrix? So for those that are listening that don't like I guess how Elon Musk rationalizes it is that if you can imagine virtual reality, continuing its track of getting so good that you can't tell the difference, then, which, maybe in 100 years, we might be, maybe not, maybe like what you're saying, it's 99.9%. But if it's so good that you can't tell the difference, how do we know that this reality right now isn't a virtual reality?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I sometimes look into. I'm sometimes interested in transhumanism. Like there's different branches of transhumanism and the whole singularity thing. I read about it, but it's interesting. There's different schools of thinking within that, but that will be a whole different subject.
That's for the follow-up podcast later this year after your book is out, and I can read that. Read the second book, and then I will have so many more questions for you. So we'll definitely do a follow-up.
You're one of the first ones who gets it. Yeah, for sure.
Yay! Yeah. Give me a signed copy. Wonderful. Right. Well, thank you so much, Cornel. This has been absolutely fascinating. I will link to all of your things in the show notes. And yeah, really excited to read your second book.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It was really great, and I really OOUX has been really amazing for us, for me and the people I work with, and it really has helped us a lot to bring structure into complicated projects. It's really has been great. Thanks.
Thank you, and yeah, let's just continue to learn from each other.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's do that.
All right, cool. Have a great night. I know it's late for you right now, so have a wonderful night, and we'll talk soon.
All right, let's do that. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit objectorientux.com/podcast for show notes. Our soundtrack is Fighter by Ruby Vell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Happy OUXing!